I appreciate everybody coming. As you know, this is a leadership series that we have going on. This is the next one we have in that. So tonight I'm going to introduce Celia Shaughnessy. I have to tell you a brief story about my HR experience. So, sorry. When I did my MBA, I had to take an HR class like anybody who's doing an MBA class or a course. And I have to tell you, I went into that just dreading it. I mean, I thought HR was going to be just benefits and there was just nothing exciting about it. I had an instructor that was a brilliant HR professional. I think a lot of like what you're going to hear tonight and a little bit we've talked. And she really opened up my eyes that there's so much more. And she taught us about empowering employees. And I thought, you know, you always hear that. Well, I'm going to empower the employees, which really means I'm going to give more work to them, right? And then she really taught me about how you can look at their whole life cycle from that onboarding all the way through building up their career. And I actually had a different perspective that my job wasn't really so much to just bring aboard, get them to do their task for me. But my job was really about me bringing them aboard and me mentoring them to get them where they wanted to go. Even if it wasn't with my company, it was all about them. And I have to tell you, out of all the classes, I consider myself a mathematician, finance, you know, that's my heart and soul. What I've probably leveraged more than anything else out of all my MBA was what I got out of my HR. And it was really about learning, it's not about me, it's about the people that are around me, and it's about me doing everything I can for them to be elevated. And all of a sudden, HR takes a brand new look, and it's very, very powerful. So, tonight, Celia Shaughnessy is going to give you a message. She's VP of Ascension at HR. Whew.
It's okay.
Yeah. I'll let her introduce her title. I'm just a finance guy. But she's going to give you that leadership role that HR does. So it's a very different role than we kind of think of. And it fits in with our series of leaders. So
Right.
with that, I'll turn it over.
Everyone can hear me? Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I know it's evening and it's Monday, and there was the Brewers game last night, so go Brew Crew. And more excitement to come on Friday. So, Celia Shaughnessy, yes, I am the VP of Human Resources for what we call the Wisconsin market for Ascension, and I'll talk more about Ascension in a few minutes. I just want to step back and talk about who I am personally and my connection to Concordia. My family and I live in Grafton, and for about 17 years we've gone to St. Paul's, Grafton. My kids have attended the school. We are church members there, and deeply connected to Concordia. Most of our staff at St. Paul have graduated from here, and know a number of people here. As well as I've been a coach for cross country for St. Paul's for 10 years now, and have worked with Russ, your cross country and track coach. We've sponsored the Panther Prowl, and as I was pulling up, my team of middle schoolers were racing, and my daughter was one. She's a 5th grader, and she won her race. I wasn't there to see it, but it's such a beautiful campus to have it. We just had our state meet on Saturday here throughout all the mud. We're state champs. Yay. And my husband, Jeremiah, and I have 3 daughters. So Claire's our youngest, who's 10. Julia is 17 and looking at colleges, trying to get her applications in. That's a little bit of a struggle. And then our middle daughter, Madeline, who's a freshman in high school. In my own journey, I had nothing to do with human resources when I started my own career. Matter of fact, my major was political science and philosophy and music. So here I am. That's what happens with life. And when I started my career, which lends itself to my story about leadership, I actually was a community organizer through AmeriCorps as a volunteer for a year, and then ran transitional housing in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I fell into human resources when I moved to Wisconsin, and I genuinely wanted to work in the nonprofit sector. And like many cities, you have to have connections, and I didn't have any. So I was also out of money. So I started temping at what is PricewaterhouseCoopers now as an administrative assistant, and I was terrible at it. But the HR director saw something in me, thought I'd be great working with students. And so I started my career in HR, in recruiting for audit and tax, and worked my way through PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then was working for what now is Anthem for the insurance side of healthcare. And I have been with what is now Ascension for 14 years in human resources in a variety of roles. So that's who I am. And more importantly, I'd like to talk about Ascension and leadership. And I probably took a different bend to it. We're not talking about benefits tonight. It's my least favorite topic for HR, benefits and comp. I try to leave that to my team, who are much better at it than I am. But I'd really like to spend time talking about how important leadership is, what I've learned from an HR perspective and as an executive at Ascension. So this is just one of my favorite quotes. And we'll talk about it. I send out at least monthly a Shaughnessy's Top 10, which is part of leadership, is to communicate with your teams. And with that, I put quotes that goes along with the information. And this is one of my favorite of all time, and she's one of my favorite poets. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And that's, if I had to boil down human resources and how we look at engaging teams and staff, it's really about that individual and asking them daily, what is it that you want to do? What is it that you want to accomplish, and how do we help you get there? So Ascension, because a lot of people don't know who we are, you are probably familiar with what is called Columbia St. Mary, Wheaton Franciscan Healthcare, or Ministry Healthcare. In this area, you're probably most familiar with Columbia St. Mary's, since we have a campus only a couple miles from here. But Ascension is quite a large organization, and I'll go through the stats in a minute. What's most important about Ascension, though we're a little different than the for-profit healthcare companies, we're very grounded in our mission, vision, and values. You can see our mission, rooted in the loving ministry of Jesus as healer. We commit ourselves to serving all persons, particularly to those that are poor and vulnerable. And that's really important to everything we do, that we serve all in need, so we never say no if someone walks in our door. If they have insurance or they don't have insurance, we will treat them with the same dignity and respect as anyone else walking in the door. So we are a Catholic organization, so we envision a strong, vibrant Catholic health ministry in the U.S., and I'll show you how big we are. And then these are our values, which we really try to live out on a daily basis: service of the poor, reverence, integrity, wisdom, creativity, and dedication. So Ascension Health, 18 what we call markets, so to usually states. Sometimes it's broken up a little differently across state lines. So you can see here we're in Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Texas, Tennessee, Kansas, and then on the East Coast. As I said, you'll hear me refer to a market, so we're the Wisconsin market. We are the largest market for Ascension across the country, and I'll show you some of our stats. So across the country, this is where, and we take this very seriously, the care of persons living in poverty, 1.95 billion. We're in 21 states. We have 151 hospitals, 50 senior care facilities, and providers are your doctors and mid-level providers. And then we have 2,600 sites of care across the country, so it's a very large scope. Again, this is our emphasis for service for persons living in poverty. This is what we feel makes us different from other healthcare organizations. So Wisconsin in particular, we are from Eagle River, the northern part of the state, all the way south to Racine. So we are spread across the state, so we have a very large geographic spread. I think it takes about, from Racine to Eagle River, it's a little closer to 5 hours from point to point. This is part of our journey as a leadership. So as I said, many of you may have seen some of the signs for Columbia St. Mary, Ministry Healthcare, Affinity, Wheaton Franciscan. So Ascension, and this is really part of our transformation, we had to bring 4 healthcare systems together in the state of Wisconsin. We're about year 3 of that transformation. And I know I was talking to an individual that just saw our signage go up locally from Columbia St. Mary to Ascension. So we're rolling out our branding, and you'll see the rest of that in southeast Wisconsin. You can see our scope. We do have 23 hospitals. We have a couple that are joint ventures, and we have $3.3 billion in annual operating expenses. We now have about 18,000 associates. That's part of the transformation that we've gone through. That's been difficult as we've brought the 4 healthcare systems together. And then you can see we have 900 clinicians across the state. So again, this is our identity. The colors of Ascension, you can see here, we are a ministry of the church. We aspire to create a model community of inspired people. And that's a lot of what we do from a leadership perspective. And then our brand. And our brand, of course, you can say it's a sign. We call it a promise. So it's a lot more than a sign. And I'll show you what that promise is. So the difficulty for our leadership across Ascension is to take all of those markets, 150 associates with over 2,000 sites of care, and bring that together as one organization. So from a leadership perspective, it feels nearly impossible if you think about that. And then my scope is just Wisconsin with my team, and that alone is hard with 18,000 associates. So our promise as Ascension, this is very critical to everything we do. Our caregivers and all our support teams provide compassionate, personalized care for all, especially for those that need it the most. So when we put our sign on a building, this is what it means to us. And so when we have to build engagement with our associates and leaders, it's about providing compassionate, personalized care. So everything we do, from the moment that we're screening and hiring someone to we're exiting someone, we take this very seriously, not just for our patients, but for our associates and leaders. So I'm going to move a little bit to the leadership side. As I talked about the scope of just Wisconsin or Ascension, it is at times, I would call from a leadership perspective, managed chaos or circus. And so just to break it up a little bit, I thought I'd show you a clip showing you what managed chaos could look like.
All right, animals, we may be your new owners, but we don't want to reinvent the circus wheel here, so just go out, do what you do. Just think this is a fun warm-up for that promoter in London. Right, Marty? Marty?
Wait, can you be
Awesome!
I ain't very long, Marty.
Sonia! Wait a minute! Sonia! We don't like this. Hey, Vitaly! Got your game face on. Great! Good game face.
What's the kid's problem?
Me, Russian cat, is nice to him.
Hey, honey, look.
Look, I'm doing it. Guys, stop fooling around.
We're just having a little fun. It's like these animals do their show.
Really?
So that's really what happens in corporations daily. And my colleague David Manis is here. He's a VP of Finance for Wisconsin. He's fact checking me, but he's a great colleague. But we have a lot of conversations that go, really, like that happened? And I'm pretty sure I was clear about this objective or that objective, and yet we have a very different outcome. And that is the challenge of leadership. That's part of the challenge of human resources as well. So I just thought I'd share with you what it genuinely can look like, particularly in large organizations. If I can do this. Technology is not my friend. I'm just trying to get the slide to move. Sorry. You showed me and I didn't follow instructions. Sorry about that. Yeah, that was easy. So when you think about leadership and you think about chaos that you're trying to manage daily, think about, even as a student, your competing priorities. When you wake up and you go, okay, I got my to-do list, this is what I've got to do, this is what I'm going to accomplish, and then guess what? You have all these priorities that come at you, and when we look at it in an organizational sense, these are all the type of issues that we work through every day. So we are looking at our experience, what's that mean to our associates and leaders, what are our goals and objectives that we have to accomplish. Oh, by the way, we have a transition, so we're either transitioning an organization out or in, or acquiring one. What are your human resources in order to do that? And who are your stakeholders? Because if you don't reach out to your stakeholders, you're done. So there's a lot of competing priorities. More than I thought. So to talk about context for leadership, I do want to talk about the difference from my perspective, and it's certainly my own perspective, between change and transformation when we're talking about leadership. And I think one of the titles for this was Leading Through Change and Transformation. And I think it's one thing to manage through change and lead through change, it's another to lead through transformation. And it's been particularly challenging as a human resources professional to learn that lesson. Change is often incremental. It can be big, but it can be small. It could be as simple as we have to change this form because we have to change the location. But it's really coming from external forces, so we're going to make you change because we told you so. And I don't know that that's really leading, I think that's managing. So we often think leadership is managing a process, a problem, making something happen that's small or incremental. And I do see that differently than what I call transformation. Transformation is always large and significant. And what you want from individuals, leaders, students, and associates is you want them to feel like they're own something and they're part of something, because that's what transforms an organization or a school or a person. And I'll give you an example. If we decided, or someone did, the horse and buggy, I mean that was the main mode of transportation for years, we could have just made that more efficient and that would have been a change. Instead, we transformed and the automobile came around. And from an organization standpoint, if we look at Ascension, that is what's happening. We had to bring 4 disparate health organizations together and make them one to follow up on our brand promise. And that is very hard from a leadership perspective and an HR perspective, because everybody has their own way of doing things and have been very committed to their own mission statement and challenges. So I just want to walk through how do you manage and lead through transformation. In my mind, you just break it down. You gotta simplify, because we are in a world where we tend to make things very complex. And so I want to talk about, from my perspective, the essential leadership behaviors that I have seen over a number of years at Ascension and through my career that really helps leaders. And when I talk about leaders, every one of us is a leader in some way, even as a student. So I hope that this benefits you. I mentioned that I do a Shaughnessy's Top 10, and so I'm doing it this way so we can talk about what I broke down as the 10 essential behaviors plus a few others thrown in there. So articulate vision. Does Concordia have a vision statement? What's a vision statement? I don't know it, so it's not a trick question. So you can't get it wrong.
There's a mission statement.
Yeah.
Concordia University is a higher education, higher
Values
education
and leaders.
committed to developing students in mind, body, and spirit, for service to Christ and the church in the world.
Right. So thank you. And it's really important to have a vision statement. But here's what happens. If you ask anybody in an organization to repeat what the vision statement is, there's a lot of eyes that go in a different direction because they kind of know it, they know what it means, but they can't articulate it. And so your first challenge as a leader is to really have and hold that vision statement so people can live it and understand it and own it. So it's easy, I mean, you've read it in leadership books, articulate a vision. Okay, great, we'll put our vision or mission statement up there and we're all ready to go. Everybody's marching down the same path. It's never true. So what you have to do to articulate that vision is you have to put it in front of people all the time. So every week, every day, you have to articulate that vision in some way. How do you do that? Communicate in different ways. So do you put it out in a memo? Nobody likes memos, but you put it out in memos. You talk about it every time we have huddles for patient safety. So we have 15-minute huddles. So how are we living out our mission and vision today? What are the roadblocks to that? Visibility, have it everywhere. Because then people really feel like they're part of that vision because it's in front of them daily. The hardest part is connecting the dots. So when you articulate the vision, can anyone articulate what that means to you? What does it mean to be part of the university? Thank you.
That I have a God-given purpose and that I could live that out.
Thank you. Yeah. And I will tell you from an Ascension perspective, this is the hardest thing we do every day. At our leadership meetings, when we sit with our market executives, we are always talking about how do we connect the dots. So how does Celia, how does David, how does Bernie understand and know that they are part of our vision? Because that's what's going to help you meet your goals. Because if you don't know the vision, then what's the purpose of meeting the goals? And it truly is an exercise in focus every day. My conversations with the senior team, we have what is called an engagement survey. So every year, organizations take surveys. How are your associates feeling? How are you doing from a leadership perspective? We have that once a year, but we also have pulsing questions. So every 2 weeks, we have 13 essential questions that go out, one every other week, to really understand where our associates are with the engagement. When we come back as a senior team, once a month, we spend the time up front talking about our engagement and how do we connect those dots back to our mission and vision for each of those individuals. I will tell you, our engagement scores this year weren't terrific. So bringing 4 health care systems together, we did have to go through reductions in force. We've had a lot of change in the organization. And one area, I'll tell you the 4 main areas: communication, leadership and trust, staffing, and I'm forgetting the fourth, and it will come to me. But it was all about, I don't understand how I'm connected anymore to our mission and vision. And as a senior team, you need to do a better job so we can trust you. So how do you communicate more what we need, what our goals and actions are? So enough on that, but I'm telling you, articulating the vision sounds really easy, and it's one of the hardest things an organization can do, or a leader can do. And I will say, as a leader, it's very easy to get lost in the tactics every day, telling teams this is what you have to do, this is what we have to accomplish, and you forget to connect back to the purpose. So I have one more clip. What I think is important, part of the vision, is you have to articulate the goals and the performance that you expect. So this is one of my favorite clips. In the heat of the moment, it's a pep talk, but the reality is he's re-articulating the goals. Just click something. Second side, other side. Oh, I got it. It's called fake it till you make it. That's another leadership hint. I realized it was sports, but what happened in that clip is the coach clearly articulated what each person needed to do and what their role was in meeting their, at that point, the vision of winning. So that's where you have to step back, and instead of, you have to articulate the broad statement, but you have to break it down and say, how am I part of that vision? And that's what that coach was doing. And as leaders, that's what we need to do better. So here is the, here's one of my learnings, team first. So as a leader, if you don't put your team first, you will fail. You always have to say, what is it that my team needs? What are the roadblocks that I clear? You are their cheerleader and you are their pile picker-upper, whatever it takes. You need to put that team first. You're always in front of the team saying, what can I do for you? So for me, that's been one of our biggest lessons. You can't go out solo. Even as a senior team, there's 12 to 15 of us, and we can't assume that we can do it. It's our teams that do it. So we have to acknowledge that. We always have to put our teams first. David doesn't like this clip. We'll come back to it, it's one of my favorite, but it's Al Pacino about teamwork and how important it is. So, be humble. Some of the best leaders I've ever met are humble. They will never, they'll never take credit for anything that they may have done. They will always point to a team member, a colleague, instead of, this is what I've done, and here's how I've done it. And if you do that as a leader, your team will follow you and they'll understand you and they'll take your example. So being humble is one of the critical elements to being successful, particularly when you're leading transformation, because transformation it's kind of ugly. You're in the muck all the time. And so you really need to be able to show that you are humble, you don't know everything, you need to rely on other subject matter experts to make it work. Recognize everyone. So we have Cheers for Peers, so you can send a note to any of your colleagues at any time. But when I watch from a healthcare perspective, a president who rounds in a hospital, they're going around every unit and they're talking about, well, Sarah, I heard you did this, or your team member did that. So that little bit of recognition, all the way from the folks that are keeping our rooms clean, which is essential for patient care, up to the senior executives. You need to recognize everyone. Listen. So I will tell you from an HR perspective, this is really, really hard for leaders to do. So majority of the conflicts that we deal with employee relations is the lack of ability to listen. So it's either someone's not listening to what their accountability is, what they should be doing, or it's a leader not stepping back and going, what is that person's perspective? When people are under pressure, their tendency is to be the one who's talking and not stepping back. And if leaders, particularly under stress, or students or anybody, can just step back and say, I'm just going to stop and listen. I'm not going to prepare my next statement, my next argument, why I'm right, why somebody else is right. Step back and listen. Because if you listen, you will learn a tremendous amount. And even if it's not an employee relations issue where you're looking if you need to performance manage someone, you're trying to figure out how to solve a problem. And people tend to come into a room with their perspective and go, I'm right, and this is how you're going to do it. If you step back, you're going to learn a little bit from each person. And then you take all of that, and that will help you articulate your goals. Be persistent and consistent. So this is where I kind of added one to the 10, but ask why all the time. So David, my colleague, he's part of what we call productivity measurement. So in healthcare, you have to see how you staff a unit, and if you're efficient and productive in doing that. That sounds simple, and it's not. And so as a leadership team, because we've not been good at that between our 22 hospitals, we've had to really be consistent every single week by holding people accountable and going through the same data. It's inspect what you expect, and you have to be consistent with that inspection. And be persistent. Don't take no for an answer. If someone says, well, that's just the way it's always been, and this is the way we've always done it, say, well, help me understand that. Is there a different way to look at it? Is there a different perspective? And as a leader, you can get pretty worn down pretty quickly by people telling you no, or this is the way we've done it, or here's the answer and go away, or go talk to the following 15 people, because then hopefully she'll just get lost in the shuffle. You can't stop. You have to be persistent and consistent, and that's where your team will see that you are being a leader, because you're always cheerleading for them and you're breaking down those roadblocks. Find common ground. So, this can go both ways. It can work to your advantage and sometimes not. So, President Abraham Lincoln, this was one of his best leadership traits. He brought in a lot of folks that didn't agree with him intentionally, so they could hash out both to get a different perspective, but then also find a way from opposite spectrums to find a common ground, because that's really how you're going to be successful. So it's important to do. Now, of course, the downside of common ground is then you're just going along with the majority, and you have to be careful with that, because you have to be courageous enough to speak up if you have a different perspective. But if you can find a way to say, okay, I hear what you're saying, and it's a little different than what Joe said, but I think you both want the same outcome, you'll have better success. Be data-driven. So that's why I have my finance guy here. It's really important to always have the data in front of you and drive information and leadership by data. Part of it is it's very easy to become emotional in a situation, particularly when things aren't going well. And it's okay to have emotion, but what brings everyone back to that common ground is data. So I think that's really important. There's a balance, because I've encountered leaders and folks, and often they're not successful as leaders because that's all they do is talk about the data, the data, the data, the data, and they don't look up and go, what are people feeling and thinking and doing? It's really how you use that data, but it's critical for success. Oops, nice if I go the right way. So this is one of my favorite quotes, and it really speaks to that action piece around metrics when you're talking about a vision. Action without vision is only passing time. Vision without action is merely daydreaming, but vision with action can change the world. So I think that's the difference when you can put all of these pieces together. Part of that action, and I talked about this, is you have to provide routine feedback. So from an HR perspective, this is where we spend a lot of our time with leaders and associates. It's very hard for people to have difficult conversations. So if you're sitting in front of someone at the end of a year, in the middle of the year, it really should be like every other week that you're giving feedback. You need to be courageous enough to tell people in a humane and kind way where there can be improvement, how they may not be meeting the goals, engage in that discussion. Because if they don't understand their own progress from your lens, they're going to keep doing what they're always doing, and that won't necessarily lead the organization to success. And part of those conversations, again, is going back to that vision, saying what's the vision, what are the actions and goals, and how are you part of that, and how are you performing against those. So that's what drives the accountability, and also gives you a great opportunity for recognition. So this is when you say, okay, forget it. I can't take in any more information, and go with your gut sometimes as a leader. So everybody could be actively telling you why this is a very bad decision, and you do have the data in front of you, you do have the vision in front of you, you have different people with different perspectives. You know, I'll talk about the Brewers for a minute. They are extremely successful this year in part because of their pitching. And if you dug in a little bit, they went through, and David's going to correct me because he's a big baseball fan, but I think it was, they had 4 trades before they got our famous hitter. Yelich, yeah. And there was a lot of critics out there that said, what the heck are you doing? You're trading away a lot of great players. and look where we are now. And that was a moment where it was ignore the data and go with your instinct, develop some of your best players. With the pitchers, they're constantly shifting and looking at what they're doing in the infield, and a lot of times, again, it's not what the commentators are saying, it's not what all the critics are saying, he has a great way of ignoring everything around him, and he's built a very successful team. So there are moments when you need to do that. Lead by example. This is a little bit of that humbleness that I talked to. How you act is how your team will act. So how you react to news, how you deliver news. It's critical. You have to have enough self-awareness. You have to have enough self-awareness to know your weaknesses, express those weaknesses, share those with your team, but also the strengths of the team, because people really do follow what you say and how you act. I can't help it. So this is what's called bad coaching. So this is how you shouldn't act.
Why are you the way that you are? Honestly, every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way. I hate so much about the things that you choose to be.
I couldn't help it. So how do you think a team would react to a leader like that over time? They all leave, right? And you know what's going on in that other gentleman's head. I mean, the internal dialogue that he's kind enough not to articulate back is probably fairly significant. So again, it's leading by example. I'm never going to get this right, am I? This is one of my weaknesses. I'm very self-aware of my inability to manage technology.
That's a great thing.
Right there, Dave.
Yes!
That's coaching right there, just in case you're.
Yeah, that's coaching. So I would say this is what I've learned the most over the last 3 years, particularly with the transformation of bringing 18,000 associates together. We really had to rebuild our leadership team from the ground up. We put new leaders in almost every single hospital, a lot of nursing leaders, a lot of associates that we had to say goodbye to, a lot of associates that we had to reposition in the organization. And as an HR professional, I probably spend, in my role, 95% of my time coaching. And it really is coaching around leadership. And here's the one piece I've learned. Leaders that are most successful always lead with love. Always. Always, always. And when I have a senior leader that says, I have a hospital president that's struggling with associate engagement, we have a turnover issue, but I can't quite get it because they're really smart, they're articulating the goals, they're articulating the vision, they're making sure that they're holding people accountable, and yet we're losing the team. I don't get it. I don't know what to do, because you can't point to failure of a goal per se. It usually is because they're not leading with love. And when you want to lead with love, that means you are humble, you are listening, and you're just embracing people for who they are. It doesn't mean that you're not holding them accountable, but you're understanding where they're coming from, and you're demonstrating that by your own actions. So in all of my years of HR, which is now 20 plus, this is the biggest lesson I've learned for leaders and HR professionals, that if you're going to coach someone, you've got to help them understand what it means to lead with love. And honestly, depending on the organization, sometimes that's where the fit becomes an issue, and it won't work for an organization depending on where you're grounded from a mission and value. But that's been my largest lesson over the last few years. particularly when we've been in situations where you've got to let a lot of good leaders and associates go. It's not about performance, it's about where the organization is, and you've got to do that with love, and help them move to their next opportunity as well. So when you're leading with love, you're serving as a role model by always demonstrating those values. And we talked about the Ascension values, and Concordia has similar values. So act in accordance, always walk the talk, and model those behaviors. And you're always coaching individuals every opportunity you have by showing their support, giving them mentorship, and setting those milestones. In the beginning, I showed how it's hard with all those conflicting priorities to keep these lessons in front of you. But if you break it down and go back to the basics, I can tell you as an organization, as a leader, as a person, you have a high chance of success. You hear it a lot in our organization that we have to pivot. We're going down one path and all of a sudden we got to go another one. And that is where you really have to demonstrate leading with love, because you want to go in a corner and in a little ball and cry, but you can't. You got to stand up, pivot, do something else. You've got to have a lot of patience, and you've got to leverage the people around you and their talents. So in closing, if you look at what I call the essential leadership behaviors, this is bundling those 10 or 11 that I shared. But serve as a role model, articulate specific performance expectations, coach people, navigate the priorities, and provide routine feedback. And then you'll be, the perfect ringmaster. So I've done a lot of talking, and I know it's late, and I see the yawns, which I fully appreciate. But let me open it up to questions and comments on any or all of this, or anything I didn't touch on as well. Yes.
I'm pretty familiar with Wheaton Franciscan, just from people who work there and stuff. Explain to me, or how did Ascension think about with Columbia St. Mary's and the other people, what they had as good values to begin with, and how they transformed? So think about St. Joe's is the baby hospital, and Columbia St. Mary's. Did you try to incorporate those when they were chosen, or how you bring them in? I'm just
Well, here's the great news. When Ascension is looking at acquisitions, they are looking at organizations that have very similar mission and values. So if you took the mission value statement from Wheaton Franciscan, from Ministry Healthcare, from Affinity, from Columbia St. Mary's, they were very, very similar. And so that was the easy part, to say that we are grounded in the same type of values, and the mission statement is fairly the same. The hard part is, once you do that, it's people are so used to their own routines and how it used to be, and it isn't necessarily that the vision and mission is different, but it's how they work. Now, what I will tell you, what makes it very hard is, you'll see this in our own engagement scores, is when you have change or you're trying to move towards transformation, you're often accused of not upholding your values and mission statement. So that's where the struggle has been for us, and that's the hardest part about being a leader in the organization, is how do you articulate that we continue to carry out our mission and values, and how people are part of that, even though there were differences and nuances in each organization. And it's ongoing, I will tell you. It's there's not one magic bullet for that solution. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
So how do you meld your data and upholding your vision when it's not cost effective?
she's in the
Yes, I do that.
David, are you going to answer that? I'll give a perspective too, but I'll let him give his.
At the end of the day, and I work in finance, so I could say this, right? you know, I used to walk around the department and I'd ask people, what are you doing today? What are you doing today? People would ask me, what are you doing today? And I always said, I'm saving lives, right? Because at the end of the day, it's important that within an organization that everybody is focused on one thing, right? And ours is, you know, just like Jesus says healer, like we are focused on providing for the health and welfare of the people in our communities, right? With special attention to the poor and vulnerable. So there are a lot of decisions that we make, you know, and you guys can pull our financial statements and you'll know that this is true. We're not the most profitable organization in the world. We are the largest not-for-profit healthcare company in the world, however. And the reason why that is that people want to be part of this. Somebody, you had asked earlier, you know, how do you decide how and when you're going to, you know, accept partners to become, you know, what you are? And it's really making sure that everybody is aligned with that same mission, vision, and values. So yeah, those, it's difficult sometimes because the other thing that I used to say a lot, that I've stopped saying, but it's still true. No, you know, no mission, no margin, no margin, no mission, right? The reality is that we do have to take care of the healthcare dollars of our community. So we have to be financially prudent. You know, we talk a lot about productivity. How do we provide the best level of care with special attention to, you know, the patient experience for the best value? So really, it's going back to what you're trying to accomplish as an organization, and our focus is on providing the best care possible. Sometimes it's more expensive, but what we do is basically try to basically balance those things to ensure that we're providing the best care for the most affordable dollar. So that was a really long-winded way of like not answering your question at all. However, there's a bit of truth in that you know you say, well, how do you do that if it's not cost effective? It's balancing those things. It's finding those areas that you can be profitable at in order to pay for those areas that aren't so profitable. And that's a big part of what my job is. That's a big part of what Celia's job is. That's a big part of what the leadership is getting that balance. What can we do effectively and efficiently for the organization, but really what can we do to help the community?
So personalized, compassionate care, right? So that's what at least we're aligned with what our goals are. So that wasn't even the plan. And I'll just talk about productivity, give you a daily example of, you know, we're telling the managers on the floor to be efficient with their staffing, but we also say, do the right thing in providing personalized, compassionate care. So, you know, there's an assumption of how long, what you need from a staffing perspective, how long it will take to turn over a room for throughput, etc. But we emphasize with the nurse, do the right thing always for personalized, compassionate care. So if you have a patient that's dying and you've got 6 family members in the room, guess what? It will take longer than the data tells you it will and should. And that's okay, because that's the right thing to do, and that's personalized, compassionate care. Make sure the family members can say goodbye, that you're giving them the information, etc. So, and balancing it with the corporate people like us that gets on a weekly call and says, well, you only have 70% of your departments productive. And we have to learn how to balance that. So the best way you can do that is walk the talk. So we go in and we round, and we do patient rounding. We go in with the associates, we go in with the nurses, and we say, what's going on today? And what are the roadblocks you have? And that's what they'll tell you, because they're always trying to do the right thing. They really are. But it's hard, it's almost impossible. So it's every day we have a conversation about managing the data and efficiency. And it's, I don't know, it's a daily challenge. But great question. Yeah.
As a leader at HR, what do you do for professional development?
Great question. I run. I do run. So for professional development, not enough, I will tell you that. But I do try to go, well, I'll tell you, part of my professional development, what helped me a lot is I went back and got my master's. I didn't get it from here, sorry. I went to Michigan State in management, leadership, and strategy. So what I would give as the best advice for HR and what I've done is instead of getting professional development in HR from a tactics, because you'll get the tactics, you can talk about benefits and comp and performance reviews and SMART goals and all those pieces. Learn your business. So my professional development is learning healthcare, learning the industry, learning other industries, because I can take those learnings into human resources and really flourish. Because one thing from a human resources perspective is we've been known for the tactics, and we always have to do those. So those are I call the daily blocking and tackling. We need to make sure that people are onboarded, paid, get their benefits, etc. Like that will never go away, and it shouldn't. However, HR hasn't necessarily had a voice at the table from a strategy perspective as much as it should, or daily operations. So the example of productivity is HR, finance, others are trying to help drive that, so it's not just operations. And if I understand the business, then I can find ways to connect the engagement of associates, because I know what the struggles are from a strategic perspective and also from a daily perspective. So that's been my professional development over the last few years. I've been able to get the SPHR, I go to different conferences, etc., from the HR perspective. But my greatest learning is to step outside my own box. So, what else?
So you mentioned about self-awareness. So when it comes to emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
is it a competency nice to have, or is it a mandatory, given the world how it's going?
My opinion is it's a must-do, can't fail. So emotional intelligence. From a leadership perspective, I'll say it again, it's part of that leading with love piece. If you can't see past the facts and understand where someone's coming from, what they're feeling, you will not be successful as a leader. And some people are better at it than others, and that's okay. It's a gift that some people have innately. I do think it is something that can be learned over time. But I would say for success within any industry as a leader, you have to have emotional intelligence.
With just the leadership behaviors and articulating the vision and getting everyone kind of behind you, what advice do you have for when you have multiple locations and you might not have the same leadership at each location and you want to get them all kind of going the same direction?
Yeah, so this is what we've been struggling with. And I'll tell you, again, from our engagement survey, we learned over the last year we did not do a good job of that. So here's what we've started to do. Again, in our industry, sending out memos is really hard because guess what? The nurses and patient care should be taking care of patients, not reading their email. But we do that anyway because, that's what you do. I don't know what we do without our email. Here's what we've started to do. We've started huddles that are live, either on video or over the phone. So we'll get the leadership across Ascension, and we'll spend 15 minutes. And we'll start with what the vision is, and then we'll talk about the key priorities. And that gives them talking points to go back to the organization. In addition, we've started what's called huddle notes. So every Friday, the organization gets notes that they go back and they talk from the same memo and notes about what the priorities are. And I will say that then each department is taking that information and having their own huddles. Within human resources, I do that every morning for 15 minutes. Not every morning, let me take that back. Every Monday for 15 minutes. and I say, here's what's going on this week, here's what you need to know, what are your roadblocks? And that has started slowly to make a difference, because people are starting to understand what the vision is and then how they're connected to it. But it's an imperfect, if I could understand how to do that perfectly, I think I would venture out on my own and retire. But we keep working at it, and I would say it's relentless and persistence of communication in all methods that you can find that work with your associates. If you think you've communicated it, you need to communicate it about another 20 times. I know we're over time,
That's all
sorry.
Any other questions or?
Yeah.
It's just, if you don't mind sharing, it sounds like this transition has maybe been one of the more difficult things you've encountered in your career.
Yes.
I was just wondering, are there any kind of memorable moments or stepping stones that kind of got you to where you had the confidence to tackle such a transition?
That's a great question. It has been the most challenging is watching such a large organization go through so much pain to really do the right thing. Probably my lessons have been by doing all the wrong things first. I'm struggling with answering that question because it really is that good of a question. So thank you. I honestly, what's helped me as a leader and changed me the most through this transformation is stepping back. It's very easy, and David and I have seen it within our own leadership. It's very easy when challenged and under a lot of stress to react. We all do it. We'll always do it. But that's like the last thing you should do. You need to step back and go, I know I'm having a reaction, but I need to listen to what is around me and understand how those, really understand how the change is impacting people. That's been the biggest learning for me. So, what does that do personally and professionally to David? As we change our organization, as we change his department about 4 times, we went through a reorganization of finance. But that has a deep impact, and the more time you spend with people, the better. So I think that's what I mean with leading with love. So I have my team go out there, and I'll spend as much time as it takes with one leader, with one department, with one organization. And that's been my biggest learning, because it's easy to say I've got to get through my to-do list, but what's made me stronger as a leader, both in HR and just professionally, is taking the time to listen. Which isn't really answering your question, so I'm going to think about that for the next 3 days.
I kind of put you on the spot. So.
I've got an answer for you.
This is the problem with having a colleague.
Yeah. So I tell you this, and we've gone through, like Celia and I have only known each other for what? We're going on 3 years now, right? And we've already gone through wars together. And so one of the important things is that, wherever you land, you need to make sure that you find a colleague, a mentor, a partner, someone that you can rely on and lean on through difficult times, because they're going to come. They're not going to be easy. And when you're approaching change, there's always 2 questions. Whenever I'm approaching change, there's always 2 questions I ask myself. One, if not me, who? And if not now, when? Right? So if you see a need to make change, nobody's going to do it for you. Like I always joke with people when they take time off. I say, don't worry, nobody's going to do your work while you're gone. Like, don't worry about it. Like, go, nobody's going to try to do it for you. So in order to, my suggestion in being a good leader is identify opportunities for improvement. Don't wait for someone to tell you to do it. Just attack it. These monumental changes that we've gone through in just a short period of time, they weren't done by huge leaps. It's every day. It's step by step.
Inch by
It's
inch.
inch by inch.
And I will tell you that the transformation, what's taught me is just what David said, just take ownership. So my point before of learning more about the industry than HR is you just learn to dive in and be a leader regardless of what it is and hope for the best. So, and so far it's been pretty darn good. Yes?
What would you suggest you to deal with a situation when you find one of your employees is exploiting your love, misusing your love?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, if someone's really exploiting, when you give them the opportunity to be successful and listen to their perspective. So, that's the mucky part of the HR job, that's the mucky part of the leadership job. There is a point in time, and I coach leaders all the time, that they wait too long, that you have to have that difficult conversation and say, we've given you the opportunity, we've given you the coaching, we've had conversations, and at this point, it's no longer working. And I will tell you, the longer you wait to have that conversation, the worse it is for the individual, and the worse it is for the leader, because it's actually the opposite of leading with love, because you're just sort of leading them on, frankly, because they're not performing, and if they're not performing, they tend to know that, and they're unhappy. You have to be very transparent in that conversation. Again, and I said it before, leaders really struggle with having an honest conversation. And there's a way to do that and still be loving and humane. But yeah, people do exploit it, and you've got to just say, we're good, we're done, and do that kindly but firmly. And I will say that's hard, very hard.
Well, I appreciate you coming in, appreciate all the good questions, so